Legally, what was the reason for Jesus' arrest? We all know how it went down. Judas Iscariot kissed Jesus on the cheek. Gospel of Matthew is the only gospel that says that Judas was paid 30 pieces of silver. 30 pieces of silver is really not a whole lot of money. It's like the cost of replacing a donkey that has gone run over by a cart. So Judas's betrayal really wasn't for uber amount of money. Kind of shows you how shady the guy really was. Jesus was betrayed for the price of a donkey.
I can dance if I want to. I can shake my donkey behind.
The reason why Judas was approached in the first place was to find a place where they could arrest Jesus away from the crowds. They didn't want a mob scene. They didn't want a riot. I honestly believe, personal opinion here, that if Judas didn't betray Jesus, Jesus still would have ended up being arrested and crucified eventually. Maybe not that weekend, but certainly Judas expedited things. So, under what circumstances was Jesus arrested? Legally speaking, Jesus was arrested for disturbing the peace. When he overturned the tables at the temple. Why did Jesus overturn tables at the temple? The only way Jews could be forgiven of their sin was to have a sacrifice offered at the temple. The temple, of course, is the holiest place in Judaism. It was also a tourist destination. So when Jesus entered the courtyard of the temple, a lot of people with tents were set up. You had insane exchange rates. You had a lot of interest on the money lending. And then you had items that were pure, that could be used for sacrifices, but they were charging outrageous rates. Think about like going to a movie theater or going to a ball game and the price of your soda is $6. That's essentially what was happening in the temple. The only way to be forgiven of your sins was to have a sacrifice offered, and so you might as well jack up the rates of that sacrifice. Certainly you can bring an animal or sacrificial item from home, but if you're traveling from afar, do you really want to keep that animal healthy and alive and lug it along with the rest of your provisions just to have it sacrificed? So it was just easier to buy it within the context of the temple courtyard. So Jesus overturns the money lenders, he overturns the tables, and he says,
My temple should be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves.
You're ripping people off, you're capitalizing on forgiveness. Some people ask, is this when Jesus sinned? No, Jesus never sinned. Jesus was disgusted by the actions of the temple and he was defending God's house. And you can assume that would be considered a disturbance of the peace. That was breaking the law. I just can't go to the local mall and turn over kiosks. You can assume that if I was doing that, turning over the Build-A-Bear or turning over Dakota Watch Factory, I'd end up in jail, at least for the night. It's in the Synoptic Gospels where the same week Jesus overturns the table at the temple, it's the same week Jesus is arrested and put to death. Now, Jesus wasn't put to death because he overturned some kiosks, but that was enough to get him an arrest warrant. Fast forward to Thursday, Judas points out where Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus is arrested. He's taken before the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is the highest legal council for the Jews. And they start asking him religious questions, namely, are you the Son of God? Jesus doesn't really respond, and people start to accuse him of blasphemy. Here's the situation. The Jews had legal authority to put people to death for breaking any of the 10 Commandments. Gospel of John, the Jews say that they don't have the authority. That's a blatant lie. John puts that in his gospel to indicate to the reader that something fishy is going on. This whole thing is a setup. There's corruption in this justice. The very fact that Jesus isn't put to death by the hands of the Sanhedrin indicates to me there were no grounds to support the death. They didn't have enough evidence to convict them. This is why they send Jesus to Pontius Pilate. The Jews didn't have evidence to convict Jesus.